A question I couldn't answer. Have you ever reached a moment where one simple question quietly destroys all the excuses you've been using to survive? This video is about that moment. About 4 exhausting weeks in the United States, when my marriage felt heavier than my luggage, my English felt slower than my child's, and my motivation to keep learning quietly slipped away. It's a story about love, family, language, and the unexpected truth. Sometimes, the smallest person in the room becomes your greatest teacher, without even trying. The question came on a random evening. No dramatic music. No big fight. Just a tired kitchen, half-finished dishes, and a child doing homework at the table. My brain was already running on low battery, switching between English and my native language like an old phone struggling to keep a signal. My child looked up and asked, in slow, careful English, "Dad, why do you stop talking when it's hard?" That was it. No accusation. No attitude. Just curiosity. And somehow I had no answer. If you're learning English, you probably know this feeling. The moment when your brain decides silence is safer than sounding stupid. When you nod instead of speaking. Smile instead of asking. Quit instead of trying again. Psychologists call this avoidance behavior, your brain protecting your ego by reducing exposure to discomfort. In simple terms, your nervous system hates embarrassment more than it loves growth. And kids? Kids don't have that problem yet. They haven't learned shame the way adults have. Their brains are wired differently. According to cognitive science, children's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-judgment, is still developing. That's why they talk freely, mess up proudly, and move on instantly. Adults, on the other hand, carry invisible backpacks full of fear. Fear of sounding wrong, fear of being judged, fear of failing publicly. In those 4 weeks in America, I carried all of it. Pressure from work. Pressure in my marriage. Pressure to sound fluent instead of sound human. I thought I was being responsible by staying quiet, by choosing safety, by avoiding mistakes. But that night, standing in front of my child, I realized something uncomfortable. My silence wasn't maturity. It was fear wearing adult clothes. My child wasn't asking about English. They were asking about courage. In relationships, silence creates distance. In language learning, silence kills progress. Neuroscience shows that speaking, even imperfectly, strengthens neural pathways faster than passive listening alone. Your brain learns through friction, not comfort. Mistakes are literally how memory is built. And yet, there I was telling my child to be brave every day while modeling the exact opposite. That question stayed with me long after bedtime. It echoed during conversations with my spouse, where short answers replaced real connection. It followed me into daily life, where English became a wall instead of a bridge. I wasn't just losing words, I was losing presence. Here's the strange truth. When learning feels hardest, it's usually not about intelligence or time. It's about identity. You're not afraid of English. You're afraid of becoming a beginner again. My child didn't know any of this. They just asked one honest question. And sometimes that's enough to crack the entire system. Because when a child becomes your mirror, you can't look away anymore. You either change or stay silent forever. For exhausting weeks in America. For weeks doesn't sound like much. On paper, it's barely a month. But when you're living inside a foreign language, for weeks can feel like 4 years compressed into one long, jet-lagged day. Every morning starts with hope. Every evening ends with exhaustion. And somewhere in between, your confidence quietly leaks out through tiny misunderstandings you pretend don't matter. In those 4 weeks in America, my days followed a predictable pattern. Wake up early. Coffee that tastes fine but never tastes like home. Conversations that begin smoothly and then suddenly fall apart when my brain can't keep up. Simple things, doctor appointments, school emails, small talk with neighbors turn into mental marathons. Not because they're difficult, but because they're constant. Your brain was never designed to stay alert all day in a second language. Neuroscientists call this cognitive load, the mental effort required to process information. When you're using English that isn't automatic yet, your working memory gets overloaded fast. That's why you feel tired even when nothing big happened. Your brain is sprinting while pretending to walk. And exhaustion changes people. It shortens patience. It lowers empathy. It turns small misunderstandings into emotional landmines. At home, my marriage felt the pressure first. When both partners are tired, language becomes transactional. You stop sharing stories. You exchange information. Did you eat? Replaces, how are you really? Love doesn't disappear. It just goes quiet. My child noticed before we did. Kids always do. They see the pauses. The forced smiles. The way adults suddenly become very busy to avoid talking. When English feels heavy, silence feels lighter. And silence slowly moves into places it doesn't belong, like family dinners and bedtime conversations. What made it worse was comparison. Watching my child absorb English effortlessly felt like standing next to someone breathing underwater while you're drowning. Children acquire language through implicit learning. Their brains pick up patterns naturally, without conscious effort. Adults rely on explicit learning, rules, grammar, correction. Different systems. Different fatigue. So when my child chatted happily at school while I rehearsed sentences in my head before speaking, something uncomfortable grew inside me. Not jealousy. Something quieter. Shame. Shame tells you to hide. Shame tells you to wait until you're ready. Shame tells you everyone else is better than you. And shame is a terrible teacher. During those weeks, I told myself I was just taking a break from practicing English. But psychology has a better word for it: avoidance coping. It feels like rest, but it's actually retreat. The brain avoids situations where failure feels likely, even when growth is possible. The cost shows up later. You speak less. You connect less. You believe less in yourself. One night, after another quiet dinner, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't failing because my English was bad. I was failing because I had stopped engaging. I had switched from participant to observer in my own life. Children don't do that. They jump in. They interrupt. They guess. They risk being wrong 5 times to get one sentence right. Their secret isn't talent, it's permission. Permission to sound unfinished. Those 4 weeks taught me this. Motivation doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes slowly through fatigue, comparison, and unspoken pressure. And if you don't notice it early, you wake up one day fluent in silence instead of English. The irony? The solution wasn't studying harder. It was listening closer to my family, to my child, and to the part of me that was afraid to begin again. Sometimes, the longest distance isn't between 2 languages. It's between who you are and who you're pretending to be. Love sounds different in silence. Silence has a sound. Most people don't notice it at first. It slips into a room politely, like a guest who doesn't want attention. But if it stays too long, it rearranges the furniture. In my marriage, silence didn't arrive as anger or drama. It arrived as efficiency. Short sentences. Practical questions. Eye contact that ended a second too early. And strangely, English was part of it. When language feels heavy, emotions become expensive. You start choosing conversations the way you choose luggage, only the essentials. Psychologists call this emotional bandwidth. When cognitive load is high, emotional expression drops. You're not less loving. You're just tired in a very specific way. During those weeks in America, my spouse and I weren't fighting. We were coordinating. Schedules, bills, school forms, survival-level communication. It worked, technically. But love doesn't live in technically. Love lives in tone. In pauses. In the stories that start with "you'll never believe what happened today." And those stories require language. Not perfect language. Just present language. The problem was every time I spoke English outside, I used up something inside. By the time I came home, my words felt empty. So I saved them. I thought I was protecting my energy. In reality, I was starving the relationship. My child picked up on it before either of us named it. One evening, while my spouse and I were discussing plans in low, tired voices, my child said, "Why do you talk like robots now?" It was funny, and painful, and accurate. Children are excellent emotional linguists. They don't care about grammar, but they hear rhythm. They notice when warmth disappears from speech. Research in developmental psychology shows that kids are highly sensitive to prosody, the emotional music of language. They feel disconnection before they understand it. That moment forced me to see something uncomfortable. I wasn't just struggling with English. I was letting English struggles reshape my identity at home. I had become quieter, flatter, smaller. And here's the twist. I blamed the language, but the real issue was permission. Adults often believe love should be efficient under pressure. Get through it. Hold it together. But relationships don't heal through compression. They heal through expression. And expression requires practice, just like language does. So I tried something small. Almost stupidly small. Instead of long explanations, I started using short, honest English sentences at home. Not to impress. To connect. I'm tired today. I feel slow. I miss talking with you. Simple sentences activate the brain's social bonding system, the same oxytocin pathways triggered by touch and eye contact. You don't need eloquence. You need presence. My child watched this shift quietly. No applause. No comment. But the atmosphere changed. The silence lost its grip. The room felt warmer, even when the words were broken. That's when I realized something most language learners never hear. Practicing English isn't just about pronunciation or fluency. It's about emotional risk. The willingness to sound incomplete in front of people who matter. Silence feels safe. But it slowly convinces you that connection is optional. Love sounds different when it's spoken imperfectly, but honestly. And sometimes, the bravest sentence in a marriage isn't a romantic one. It's simply, "Can we try again today?" Because the moment you stop hiding behind quiet, language stops being the enemy. It becomes a bridge. Wobbly. Unfinished. But real. And children? They don't need perfection. They need truth they can hear. My child watching everything. There's a strange myth adults believe, that children are distracted. That they're too busy playing, tapping screens, or drifting in their own little worlds to notice what's really going on. That myth is comforting. And completely wrong. Children are always watching. Not with judgment. With calibration. They're learning how to be human by observing the people closest to them. During those weeks, I thought my child was absorbed in school, cartoons, and homework. I didn't realize they were also studying me. How I reacted when I didn't understand something. How my shoulders tensed when English showed up unexpectedly. How my voice dropped when I felt unsure. Developmental psychologists call this social referencing. Children look to adults to decide how to interpret unfamiliar situations. If you treat difficulty as danger, they learn fear. If you treat mistakes as normal, they learn resilience. And I was teaching the wrong lesson. One afternoon, my child was trying to explain a story from school, something about a group project, half in English, half in gestures. They stumbled, paused, looked at me, and then stopped talking completely. That moment hit harder than any language test ever could. Because I recognized that pause. It was my pause. Children mirror not what we say, but what we tolerate in ourselves. My habit of going silent when unsure had become a template. Without realizing it, I had modeled retreat as a strategy. Neuroscience explains why this happens. Mirror neurons fire when we observe behavior, especially in close relationships. Kids don't need lectures. Their brains are wired to copy patterns automatically. Which means every time I chose silence over effort, I was quietly teaching my child to do the same. That realization didn't come with guilt. It came with responsibility. I didn't need to become fluent overnight. I needed to become visible in my struggle. So I did something uncomfortable on purpose. When my child hesitated mid-sentence, I didn't rush to fix it. I said, slowly, "It's okay. Keep going. I'm listening." In English. Simple. Imperfect. Calm. Their shoulders relaxed instantly. Psychologists call this emotional safety, the sense that mistakes won't lead to rejection. It's the foundation of both language learning and healthy relationships. Without it, the brain switches to defense mode. With it, curiosity returns. And here's the strange part. The more I allowed myself to be seen struggling, the more confident my child became. Not because I was strong, but because I was honest. That's when I understood the deeper lesson. Children aren't just learning language from us. They're learning how to respond to difficulty, whether to push forward or shut down, whether effort is embarrassing or normal. English was just the surface. The real curriculum was courage. From that day on, I narrated my thinking out loud sometimes. "I don't know this word yet. Let me try again. I might be wrong." These sentences are powerful because they rewire the brain's relationship with uncertainty. Research shows that labeling uncertainty reduces anxiety and improves learning retention. My child started doing the same, guessing more, talking longer, laughing when mistakes happened instead of freezing. That's the quiet power of being watched. You don't need to be a perfect speaker to teach well. You just need to model movement instead of fear. Because when children see adults keep going, even slowly, they learn that progress isn't about confidence. It's about permission. And once that permission exists, language stops being a test. It becomes a shared adventure.
The day my child corrected me. It happened in the car, the most dangerous classroom of all. No notebooks. No preparation. Just traffic, sunlight, and a child casually destroying your ego while staring out the window. I was talking about something ordinary, maybe groceries, maybe weekend plans, and I used the wrong word. Not dramatically wrong. Just slightly off. My child corrected me. Gently. Almost politely. "Dad, I think you mean borrow, not asterisk lend." No laughter. No attitude. Just information. For a split second, my adult brain did what adult brains do best, panic. My chest tightened. My pride flinched. Every instinct told me to either justify myself or shut down completely. That's the threat response kicking in, your amygdala reacting to perceived social danger, even when none exists. But then something unexpected happened. I said, "Oh. You're right. Thanks." And the world didn't end. My child smiled. Not because they were better than me, but because something felt safe. Natural. Normal. A small correction passed between us like a ball tossed back and forth. No shame attached. This is where adults get learning wrong. We treat correction as a verdict on our intelligence. Children treat it as a tool. Studies in educational psychology show that kids exposed to low-stakes correction develop stronger language skills and higher confidence. The key isn't accuracy, it's emotional neutrality. Children don't hear, "You're wrong." They hear, "Here's another option." That moment rewired something in me. I realized I had been protecting my ego instead of training my brain. And ego protection is exhausting. It requires constant monitoring, constant avoidance, constant performance. Learning, on the other hand, requires openness. Later that day, I thought about marriage. About how many arguments start not because someone is wrong, but because someone feels corrected. Correction without safety feels like attack. But correction with trust feels like care. Language learning mirrors relationships perfectly. When correction feels safe, growth accelerates. Neuroscience backs this up. Dopamine release increases when mistakes are followed by supportive feedback. Your brain literally learns faster when it feels supported instead of judged. That night, I tried something new. I asked my child to correct me more. Not as a test. As a game. We laughed. We swapped roles. Sometimes I corrected them. Sometimes they corrected me. The power balance dissolved. And something else happened too. My spouse started joining in. Short English sentences at dinner. Playful corrections. Shared mistakes. The house felt lighter. Less performative. More human. That's when I understood the real lesson my child taught me that day. Fluency doesn't begin with vocabulary. It begins with humility. The willingness to be temporarily smaller so you can eventually grow. Children don't fear being corrected because they don't attach correction to worth. Adults do. And that belief silently destroys progress. So here's a practical truth you can use today. Invite correction. Out loud. Say, "Please correct me." It signals safety to your brain and to others. It turns language from a battlefield into a playground. Because the fastest way to learn isn't to avoid mistakes. It's to stop taking them personally. And sometimes, the best teacher isn't older, smarter, or more experienced. Sometimes, they're sitting in the back seat, watching the road go by. Why adults overcomplicate learning. Adults love complexity. We worship it. If something feels hard, we assume it must be important. If it feels simple, we get suspicious. That mindset quietly sabotages language learning long before grammar ever does. I realized this while watching my child learn English without learning it. No flashcards. No apps. No panic. Just usage. Meanwhile, I was carrying invisible rules everywhere. Speak only when confident. Avoid mistakes in public. Translate first, then talk. These rules felt responsible. Mature. Logical. But cognitively, they were a disaster. Neuroscience explains why. Adult learners rely heavily on the explicit learning system, conscious analysis, rule memorization, self-monitoring. Children rely on the implicit system, pattern recognition through exposure and use. The implicit system is faster, more durable, and emotionally cheaper. But adults block it by overthinking. My child wasn't smarter. They were freer. Adults also attach identity to performance. When you mess up English, it doesn't feel like a small error, it feels like a personal failure. That triggers the brain's self-protection response, reducing risk-taking and speech output. In simple terms, your brain decides silence is safer than sounding bad. I saw this clearly one evening when my child mispronounced a word, laughed, and immediately tried again. No pause. No shame. No internal negotiation. That retry is gold. Cognitive scientists call it error-based learning, and it's how neural pathways strengthen. Adults delay that process by emotionally punishing themselves. We don't fail more. We practice less. Marriage taught me this too. Overcomplication kills connection. When conversations turn strategic instead of honest, intimacy drops. Language learning is the same. When speaking becomes performance, fluency disappears. So I stripped things down. No perfect sentences. Just intention. Just meaning. Short phrases. Real situations. Talking while tired. Talking while unsure. Talking anyway. And slowly, something shifted. My brain relaxed. My child spoke more. My spouse engaged more. The house felt less like a classroom and more like a place where language lived naturally. Adults don't need better methods. They need fewer rules. Because learning isn't failing because you're bad at English. It's failing because you're too hard on yourself. And children? They already know the shortcut. Marriage under language pressure. Language pressure doesn't explode. It erodes. It wears things down quietly, the way water slowly reshapes stone. In a marriage, it rarely shows up as we can't communicate because of English. That would be too obvious. Instead, it disguises itself as irritation over small things. A sigh. A pause too long. A sentence that sounds colder than it was meant to be. In those weeks, English followed us home like an unpaid bill. Outside, we were both trying to survive jobs, forms, appointments, conversations that required constant attention. Inside, we expected relief. But the brain doesn't have an on-off switch. When cognitive load stays high for too long, emotional availability drops. That's not a personality flaw. It's neurology. The human brain has limited executive resources. When language processing consumes them, empathy gets rationed. So when my spouse spoke, sometimes I heard criticism instead of concern. When I responded, my words came out flat, stripped of warmth. Not because I didn't care, but because I was mentally depleted. That's how language pressure bends relationships. Not through conflict. Through misinterpretation. One evening, a simple question, "Did you finish that email?" felt like judgment. My body reacted before my logic caught up. Heart rate up. Shoulders tense. Defensive tone activated. This is the stress amplification effect. Under chronic strain, neutral inputs feel negative. And children feel that tension immediately. My child didn't understand the words, but they understood the air. Kids track emotional safety the way sailors track weather. When the atmosphere shifts, they know something is wrong, even if no one is shouting. That's why my child's question, "Why don't you talk like before?" hurt so much. It bypassed language entirely and went straight to truth. That night, instead of trying to fix English, my spouse and I did something more important. We slowed everything down. We used shorter sentences. Paused longer. Let silence exist without fear. We named what was happening. I feel tired in my head. I feel slow when I talk. I miss us. Simple English. Simple emotions. Big impact. This matters because emotional connection doesn't require complex vocabulary. Studies on emotional attunement show that tone, timing, and presence matter more than linguistic precision. A calm voice and honest sentence regulate the nervous system faster than perfect grammar ever could. We also stopped correcting each other at home. Not because correction is bad, but because home needed to be a safe language zone. A place where English could be broken without consequences. That single decision reduced tension almost immediately. Here's a practical rule that saved us. Outside equals performance mode. Inside equals practice mode. When marriage becomes another place you're evaluated, intimacy collapses. But when it becomes a place you're allowed to sound unfinished, connection returns. Slowly, English stopped feeling like a wedge between us. It became something we navigated together. Sometimes badly. Sometimes awkwardly. But together. That's the part most people don't talk about. Language learning isn't an individual journey when you're married. It reshapes roles, patience, power, and vulnerability. If you ignore that, love pays the price. But if you face it honestly, language can actually do the opposite. It can teach you how to listen more carefully, how to speak more gently, how to choose presence over perfection. And children learn that lesson too, without anyone explaining it. They learn that love isn't about saying everything right. It's about staying in the conversation, even when words come slowly. Children learn without fear. Children don't wake up brave. They wake up curious. Fear is something they learn later, usually by watching adults hesitate. That realization hit me one morning while my child was practicing English out loud, alone, talking to a toy, completely unconcerned with being correct. No audience. No approval. No fear. Just sound. That's when it became obvious. Children don't learn faster because they're smarter. They learn faster because their brains haven't connected mistakes with danger yet. Neuroscience calls this low affective filter, a mental state where anxiety is low enough for language input to flow freely into learning systems. Adults, unfortunately, build emotional walls around mistakes. Every error feels like exposure. Like evidence. Like something permanent. That fear tightens the throat, shortens sentences, and eventually convinces you that silence is maturity. But children? Children treat language like clay. You stretch it. Drop it. Reshape it. Laugh when it collapses. Try again. I started noticing how often my child guessed words. Not carefully. Wildly. Sometimes wrong. Often close enough. Guessing is powerful because it engages predictive processing, the brain's natural habit of anticipating patterns. When predictions fail, the brain updates itself. That's learning in its purest form. Adults avoid guessing because being wrong feels personal. Children guess because being wrong feels temporary. That difference changes everything. So I tried an experiment. I copied my child. I guessed more. I stopped translating in my head first. I spoke before certainty arrived. And something surprising happened. My comprehension improved. Faster than before. Science supports this. Studies show that output-based learning, speaking before full understanding, accelerates fluency. Your brain learns what it needs when it feels the gap. Silence hides the gap. Speech exposes it. At home, we made English playful. We named objects wrong on purpose. We invented silly sentences. We let conversations wander. My child laughed. I relaxed. My spouse joined in. The emotional tone shifted from effort to ease. Fear lost its authority. That's the part no textbook explains. Fear doesn't just slow learning. It rewires motivation. When fear is present, the brain prioritizes safety over growth. When fear is absent, curiosity takes over automatically. Children don't push themselves. They follow interest. And interest is magnetic. One night, my child asked, "Why do adults stop trying when it's hard?" That question stung because it was accurate. Adults confuse difficulty with inability. Children interpret difficulty as part of the game. Language learning doesn't fail because adults lack discipline. It fails because adults protect their identity too fiercely. They'd rather be silent than sound foolish. But here's the quiet truth my child taught me. Sounding foolish is temporary. Staying silent is permanent. When you remove fear, consistency returns naturally. You don't need motivation hacks. You need emotional safety. That's why children progress so fast, they live inside it. So if you want to learn English the way children do, stop copying their vocabulary. Copy their attitude. Guess. Repeat. Laugh. Try again. Speak while unsure. Your brain already knows how to learn. It's just waiting for permission. And sometimes, that permission doesn't come from a teacher or a course. Sometimes, it comes from watching a child speak freely, and realizing you used to know how to do that too. Small English moments at home. Nobody tells you this, so most adults miss it completely. Fluency doesn't grow in study time. It grows in the cracks of the day. The moments so small you'd never label them as learning. That's why people say, I study a lot but I still can't speak. They're watering the wrong soil. At home, English finally stopped intimidating me because it stopped being important. That sounds backwards, but it works. When language becomes important, it becomes heavy. Heavy things demand perfection. And perfection kills repetition. But small moments don't ask for excellence. They only ask for presence. I noticed this one evening while helping my child clean up toys. No lesson plan. No intention to practice. I just said, let's put this here. My child replied, no, that goes there. Back and forth. Maybe 6 sentences total. 6 sentences that rewired more than 6 pages of notes ever could. Neuroscience explains this beautifully. When language is embedded in procedural memory, actions like cleaning, cooking, walking, it becomes automatic. The brain doesn't treat it as information. It treats it as behavior. That's why kids sound natural so fast. They're not learning English. They're living inside it. Adults separate language from life. Kids don't. So I stopped asking, when will I practice English, and started asking, where is English already happening? Morning routines. Simple requests. Short reactions. Wait a second. Let me see. That's okay. These phrases repeat daily. Repetition without pressure creates fluency faster than novelty ever will. I also noticed something subtle in my marriage. When English showed up in tiny, harmless ways, my spouse relaxed. No one felt evaluated. No one felt corrected. The house became a low-stress language environment, which linguists know is critical for sustained output. There's a concept called micro-exposure in language acquisition. Tiny, frequent exposures lower the effective filter gradually. You don't feel progress happening, but your brain is quietly stacking familiarity. That's why one big study session often leaves you exhausted and discouraged, while 10 small interactions leave you feeling oddly confident. Children understand this instinctively. They don't wait for learning mode. They speak when there's a reason. When language serves a purpose, the brain prioritizes it. At home, English started serving real purposes again. asking, responding, reacting, joking, failing safely. I also stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. That was huge. Self-correction breaks flow and signals danger to the brain. Instead, I finished the thought. Then moved on. Flow matters more than form in early fluency. My child did the same. Longer sentences. More guessing. Less freezing. That's when it clicked. Motivation didn't return because I tried harder. It returned because the environment changed. Motivation isn't something you force. It's something that appears when fear leaves. If you're tired of trying to learn English, here's the quiet strategy most people overlook. Shrink the task until your brain stops resisting. Don't schedule English. Notice it. Use it. Let it blend into life. Fluency isn't built by impressive effort. It's built by unremarkable consistency. And one day, you realize you've been speaking more, without remembering when you started again. When learning became emotional, something quietly shifted the day English stopped living in my head and started living in my chest. Before that, English was mechanical. Vocabulary in, grammar out. Useful, but cold. Like reading instructions for a machine you don't really care about. I could study it. I could force myself to practice it. But I couldn't stay with it emotionally. And that's why motivation kept disappearing. The human brain doesn't attach to information. It attaches to meaning. When something feels emotionally neutral, the brain categorizes it as optional. When something carries emotion, the brain marks it as important. That night, listening to my child's broken story, English suddenly mattered, not because it was correct, but because it was shared. I wasn't decoding words. I was receiving a piece of their day. Their excitement. Their confusion. Their pride. Emotion turned English into a bridge. Psychologists call this emotional salience. When learning connects to personal relationships, the brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals associated with reward and bonding. These chemicals don't just make you feel good. They increase attention and memory retention. That's why language learned through relationships sticks longer than language learned through obligation. I noticed the same shift in my marriage. When English became the medium for honesty instead of performance, conversations softened. We weren't trying to sound good. We were trying to be understood. That subtle intention changes tone, pace, and patience. I feel overwhelmed today. I don't have the right words. I'm trying. Those sentences aren't impressive. But they're powerful. They invite connection instead of evaluation. Before, I avoided emotional conversations in English because I was afraid of sounding childish. But here's the irony: emotional language is simple. Feelings don't require advanced vocabulary. They require courage. Children understand this instinctively. They speak emotions directly. Adults wrap emotions in complexity to protect themselves. Once English carried emotion, quitting felt different. Stopping practice no longer meant I'm tired of studying. It felt like I'm stepping away from connection. And the brain resists losing connection much more than it resists losing discipline. This is why so many people burn out learning English alone, but thrive when they use it with someone they care about. Language isn't just a skill. It's a social behavior. There's also a neurological reason emotional learning feels easier. When you speak emotionally, you're not monitoring grammar as tightly. The brain shifts from self-monitoring mode to expression mode. That reduces anxiety and increases fluency naturally. I stopped asking, is this sentence right? I started asking, does this express what I feel? Fluency followed. My child didn't push me, didn't motivate me, didn't teach me rules. They simply made English feel safe, human, and alive. And that's the part most learners miss. You don't need more pressure. You need more meaning. More emotional anchors. More reasons to speak that aren't about improvement. Because once learning becomes emotional, effort stops feeling heavy. Practice stops feeling forced. English stops being something you chase and becomes something you return to. Not to be perfect, but to be present. What my child really taught me. For a while, I kept telling people my child helped me improve my English. That's the easy version of the story. The socially acceptable one. But the truth is quieter and much harder to admit. My child didn't teach me English. My child taught me how to stop abandoning myself. Adults leave themselves behind the moment things feel uncomfortable. We do it politely. We call it being realistic, not ready yet, or waiting for the right time. But neurologically, it's the same behavior, withdrawal to protect identity. Children don't do that. When my child didn't know a word, they didn't apologize for existing. They circled around the idea. They used hands, sounds, wrong words, laughter. They trusted that meaning would arrive if they stayed long enough. That trust is rare in adults. Psychologists describe this as tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to remain engaged without full understanding. It's a critical skill for language learning, emotional intimacy, and problem solving. Children have it naturally. Adults train it out of themselves. Watching my child struggle without shame forced me to see how harsh I had become with myself. Every pause felt like failure. Every mistake felt recorded. My internal dialogue wasn't a coach, it was a judge. And judges don't help you learn. They make you freeze. That realization changed how I showed up everywhere. In English, I stopped exiting conversations early. I stayed, even when sentences came out wrong. I used fillers. I asked for help. I let people see me think. That alone increased my speaking time dramatically, because I stopped disqualifying myself mid-sentence. In marriage, I noticed the same pattern. When emotions felt messy or hard to explain, I used to retreat. Change the subject. Go quiet. My child's example reminded me that staying, even awkwardly, is more important than sounding composed. Connection doesn't require elegance. It requires endurance. There's a neuroscience reason this works. When you remain engaged during uncertainty, your brain stays in learning mode instead of threat mode. Blood flow remains in the prefrontal cortex, where language and reasoning live, instead of shifting to survival circuits. Staying present is a biological advantage. My child also taught me something subtle about authority. Adults think teaching flows downward, from parent to child. But learning flows toward whoever is most honest in the moment. And honesty doesn't belong to age. It belongs to courage. The irony is painful and beautiful. I was trying to teach my child resilience while modeling avoidance. The moment I stopped pretending to be strong, I became more useful, to myself and to my family. This is the lesson that stayed with me the longest. Growth doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from staying longer. Staying with confusion. Staying with discomfort. Staying with imperfect language and unfinished feelings. Children do this naturally because they haven't learned the habit of escape yet. So when I say my child became my teacher, I don't mean they corrected my English. I mean they reminded me of a skill I once had and forgot. The ability to remain curious instead of critical when things get hard. And once you recover that skill, learning stops being a battle. It becomes a relationship. A quiet lesson worth remembering. Some lessons don't arrive with clarity. They arrive softly, the way evening light fills a room without asking permission. This was one of those lessons. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady enough to change the direction of everything. Looking back at those 4 weeks in the United States, nothing extraordinary happened. No breakthrough moment where English suddenly became fluent. No grand speech. No perfect sentence that fixed my marriage or made parenting easier. What changed was something smaller and much more durable. I stopped running from difficulty. That's the lesson my child left me with. Not through teaching. Through being. Children don't separate life into practice and performance. They live in one continuous attempt. They don't wait to feel confident before speaking. They speak until confidence catches up. Adults reverse that order and get stuck waiting. When I finally noticed this, English stopped being the center of the story. It became the background where something more important was happening. Presence. Patience. Willingness to stay. In language learning, staying means you don't disappear mid-sentence when your brain stalls. You breathe. You continue. You allow silence without quitting. Neuroscience confirms that sustained engagement during difficulty strengthens neural connections far more than stopping and restarting later. In marriage, staying means you don't shut down when emotions are hard to express. You speak simply. You speak slowly. You speak anyway. Emotional connection doesn't require perfect language, just continuity. In parenting, staying means modeling effort instead of success. Children don't need fluent parents. They need visible ones. Parents who try. Parents who fail gently. Parents who keep going. The quiet lesson is this: progress doesn't come from intensity. It comes from loyalty to the process. Showing up again. Using what you have. Letting imperfection exist without panic. That's what my child taught me, without realizing they were teaching anything at all. If you're tired of learning English, tired of starting over, tired of feeling behind, maybe the problem isn't discipline or talent. Maybe it's that you've been asking too much of yourself at the wrong moment. Children don't ask, "Am I good enough to speak?" They ask, "What happens if I try?" And that question changes everything. Because the moment you stop demanding perfection, language starts serving you instead of judging you. It becomes a bridge again. Between people. Between moments. Between who you were and who you're becoming. That's a lesson worth remembering. Quiet enough to miss. Strong enough to last. And maybe the most important thing I learned these past few weeks wasn't a new word or a better sentence structure. It was this: you don't need to be better to start speaking, you just need to stay a little longer with yourself. If today you feel tired, discouraged, or close to giving up on English, you're not weak. You're just an adult carrying too much pressure. Try learning like a child again. Speak slowly, speak imperfectly, keep going, and don't walk away halfway. If this story resonated with you, please hit like so I know you're here. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep practicing slow, real-life English through emotional, honest stories, without pressure. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment and tell me, what scares you most about speaking English? I read every single one. We don't need to be perfect to learn better. We just need to stay a little longer. That's all for today. I'll be making more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to watch more.